All right, everyone. It's Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. This is our Ohio State hour each and every Wednesday night at 9 o'clock Eastern time. So if you've stumbled upon this for the very first time and you love the Buckeyes, or even if you hate the Buckeyes, this might be your place to stop as well. Or if you're just a college football fan that loves to keep track of the elite teams and programs, then this would be your place to be. If you never watch college football, then you may want to move on. But if you fill any of those other boxes, please keep it locked in right here. Again, each and every Wednesday night at 9 o'clock Eastern time. We've got our distinguished panel of In the Middle, Steve Hellwagon, Big Ten senior writer of Bucknuts, right there on 247 Sports. Rivals, Kevin Noon. You can join him on BuckeyeGrove.com and Tony Gerdeman from theozone.net. Gentlemen, how are we doing tonight?
Very well.
You're doing great.
Good stuff. Good to see all of you.
I think Steve is muted.
It's good to be seen. And based on our review of most of the national publications, despite a long winning streak, despite more talent on the roster as determined by the recruiting rankings over the course of the last 4 or 5 years, despite a number of psychological advantages you would think Ohio State would continue to have over Michigan. The Michigan Wolverines, by most of the major publications, are the favorite. Not a large favorite, usually outranking Ohio State by most of these publications by a spot or 2 or 3 in the national rankings, but being selected as Big Ten champion. Tony, since you served up this topic for tonight, I would like to know what your thought is on Michigan being basically the Big Ten favorite.
Well, I think you begin, whenever you're looking at stuff like this, you begin with, is the quarterback back, and what does the schedule look like? And in the Big Ten East, you're going to look at Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan. And there's only one starting quarterback returning there, and that's Shea Patterson at Michigan. So right there, that gives them the edge. Ohio State goes to Michigan this year. That gives them another edge. However, Michigan has lost a lot, and that goes to, they lost the running backs, Karan Higdon. Chris Evans isn't playing this year. They could be relying on a true freshman running back, and while some teams get away with that, Ohio State did in 2017, it's not the ideal situation. And you look at the defensive losses they have, losing pretty much almost their entire defensive line. Devin Bush at middle linebacker. They lost a corner, lost a safety, and they've really never had the defensive depth that they need, and that always comes out later in the season. Like looking at their last few games every year. In 2018, I was just looking at some stats. I think they gave up over 5 yards per play, 4 times in each of the last 3 games they did it. They were 1-2 in those 3 games. 2017, they lost their last 3 games. They gave up over 5 yards per carry and 4 times that year, and each time in the last 3 games. 2016, they gave up 30 points twice that season in the last 2 games. So when I look at this Michigan defense, they're not a lot of familiar faces, and they have not recruited very well on the defensive line, and they don't really have the depth that it's going to be needed. And when you look at the middle of the line especially, I know they returned defensive tackle Carlo Kemp, but there's not a lot behind him, and he's not much all by himself. I'm not saying he's Jack Cohn, Noon. I'm not saying he's going to be like some.
Well, nobody's that awful.
But I don't know where. Now, I trust Don Brown completely, and I know Indiana and Ohio State have had their way a little bit with him. But we've seen him be able to make a great defense with one returning starter. But the guys coming off the bench were, like Devin Bush was a new starter that year, and I don't see any Devin Bushes. And there's certainly I don't think there's any Chase Winoviches. And the guys that they have played bit parts last year, and they're going to have to be main players this year.
Tony, I would love to get you to weigh in on this. Actually, all 3 of you, before we get to the actual football analysis of this from Steve and from Kevin. And Steve, you can start on this, and then we'll get back to Tony and to Kevin. Is there aside from the football analysis, any incentive from these publications or anyone out there to make a prediction that may sell a few more magazines?
Yeah, if Steve is muted. If you want to, I think if you want to unmute him, then he can go. Or if we like him like this, I kind of like it.
Tony, you continue, and I will do my best.
All right.
I don't know if
You know,
I did here.
I don't know how much of it is wanting to sell magazines, because I think the magazines sell with Ohio State on the cover, and you will have some Buckeye fans who won't buy a magazine if there's Michigan players on the cover. So I think it's like I said, it goes back to Shea Patterson as a returning starting quarterback. That's a very important thing, and that's one of the things I look at. Schedule: Ohio State goes to Michigan. That's, when you look at Ohio State's last losses to Michigan, it's been in Ann Arbor. There's not very many of them, but that's where they come from. So you look at Penn State, and I don't think anybody really trusts them right now with all of the losses they've had on offense. So I don't see it as a way to sell magazines or something. It's not shady like the recruiting business, right, Noon?
Exactly. Well, I agree with you in terms of what they're returning. I don't think there's anything nefarious about them trying to sell a couple more magazines that Michigan fans are suddenly going to go out and buy them because they're picked to get there, and that Ohio State fans will be outraged. I mean, Ohio State fans love to be outraged, don't get me wrong. But with that being said, they do return their quarterback. They have a head coach that has more than a 3-game head coaching tenure as Ryan Day has. They return most of their offensive line. You can't say that about most of the teams of the Big Ten, especially in the East. And, we can debate whether or not, John Runyon is a terrific player. I think Ben Bredesen's pretty good. We could debate Ed Warner and what he's been able to do so far with that line. But everything that they're returning, I understand why maybe the editors of these magazines say that Michigan may be the safe pick. But they also win the September Heisman every year. They always are the team, them and Notre Dame and a couple others out there, that get a lot of the preseason, early season buzz. And I mean, I expected it. I honestly expected Michigan to be ranked ahead of Ohio State in terms of where a lot of these prognosticators were going to be. And, we'll revisit it mid-October and see where things are at that point.
Steve is unfortunately muted, and I have no idea how it got that way. I cannot unmute him, and so we will continue to work on this. But, Steve, I don't know what to tell you, because I don't know how that nothing I'm clicking is working to unmute you, unfortunately.
I'm sending him text messages on what he should try to do, but it's above my pay grade.
Yes, my pay grade always recommends to click out and come back in, and Steve's already tried that. So, yeah, I think that the Ohio State versus Michigan portion of this is just simply that I think Tony summarized it. And Kevin, I got to admit, I didn't even listen to anything that you were saying. I was working on Steve's.
Neither does my wife.
I'm sure it was compelling. But it's just the simple case that Ohio State has the track record. They do have a more talented roster. I don't think there's any question about that. Is it substantially more talented? Probably not. Decidedly, yes. But Michigan has the key factors of the coach in place, the quarterback in place, the home game. And I think because of the transition, I think that people are looking for an opportunity to say, this streak has to be broken at some point. And if it is broken, Michigan's good enough to win the division with that 1-game advantage over Ohio State head to head. So it has to happen at some point.
Yeah. And I think it's been a while since we've seen them picked. So if it's going to happen, it happens in a year where Ohio State has a new coach, new quarterback, a completely revamped defense, and they're going to Michigan. So, it makes sense to me. But, I guess it eventually has to happen, and Michigan will eventually beat Ohio State, and it could be this year. It's just I think what is most interesting is how it's all the magazines. it's consensus that Michigan is going to win the Big Ten. And I haven't checked out Street and Smiths because I'm not a 60-year-old person who lives at a drugstore. And that's, I don't know. I don't know about Street and Smiths. It's not a magazine that I've looked at anymore. But just the consensus that Michigan is the top in the Big Ten, I think, is maybe what has struck me most about these projections.
Yeah, Ohio State and Michigan could play each other 10 times this year, and you could come up with, how many does Michigan win? How many does Ohio State win? You only have to play this game once, and you have to win it the one time. And I think a lot of the nation, and I'm not saying that the writers are doing this to placate anybody, but a lot of the nation would probably like to see the rivalry return to a little bit more of a competitive spot than where it is. So, time may go to the underdog in terms of that, and that's why they may put them there at this point.
Yeah, as soon as you make that comment, Kevin, it brings me back to a place in which when I started the current job that I have, I met a Michigan fan because he was training me, and he was bored of the rivalry. Well, this was the fall of 2001. So he was bored of the rivalry at that point and said it really wasn't a rivalry, and he actually wished it would become a rivalry. And boy, did his wishes come true. And then flip on him to the other side here 18 years later.
If you get bored with it, you deserve what happens to you. That's how I view it. If you're not always about the rivalry and you start to take it for granted, you don't deserve it.
Trial. We may have to testify about
Steve.
Hey, Steve, how are you?
I'm great.
Boy, I'm going to have to carve up this video. Not only has there been all sorts of comments made during our Ohio State discussion by myself in particular about Steve's status and trying to get his mic activated, but also I have lost control of the automatic direction of the camera shots to whomever's talking. So that's lost control as well. So, Steve, regardless, it's good to see you.
I'm glad to be here. I will do my best to try and make this the best roundtable discussion that we can make it.
Well, we've got a lot to make up for then. By no fault of Tony and Kevin's, of course. But, Steve, we would love to get your perspective on why all these publications are coming out with Michigan as the Big Ten favorite.
Well, I think they watched Ohio State's spring game and saw how, lack of a better term, how poorly Justin Fields looked. I mean, he completed 4 passes. So, when you go from Dwayne Haskins and everything that he was able to accomplish the last year to now the uncertainty of what the passing game's going to look like, encounter that with the fact that Michigan does have a stud by the name of Shea Patterson, who threw for 2,600 yards and 22 touchdowns last year, has experience. The game's being played in Michigan. I don't know. I mean, I know Michigan's defense was gutted by the NFL. When you talk about guys like Gary, Bush, Winovich, and so on, all leaving, let's see here. They've got them for maybe 4 or 5 returning starters on defense. So, you look at it, I think that is what people are considering, is that Michigan on paper has the better team going into the season. Now, on paper, they had the better team going into the game last year, and Ohio State just absolutely dominated them. So, to the tune of 62 points. So, I think you just have to think about it, take it with a grain of salt, and just understand that that the magazines and the prognosticators are thinking this is finally going to be Michigan's year. They have a senior quarterback playing at home in Michigan, and maybe, just maybe, this will be their year. But I still am of a mind you're going to have to show me before I believe it.
And I think one thing that you touch upon is I'll let Kevin, if you're jumping in, let me just transition to it to you this way. that I think it's not just the Haskins departure, but it's the Haskins departure to Justin Fields, and it's also the what was lacking last year and it not being proven that those things are fixed. And so this isn't that Troy Smith was prolific last year and now he's gone, but the defense was just tremendous and the running game worked and everything else was good. Sure, there might be a drop off at quarterback, but all the rest of the team was top 5 to top 10 caliber. Or the other quarterback transitions we've seen from prolific quarterback seasons in recent past to, okay, there's a bit of a transition here. Maybe it's Braxton Miller, whatever the case might be. But we've seen, okay, the defense was elite and the running game strong, and we have all this. It seemed like Dwayne Haskins carried this team, and I think that was overplayed because it's the ultimate team game. But just the drop off at that position potentially because of the unknown factor, and then just everything else wasn't necessarily fixed. It was remedied and patched up, and it looked better the last few weeks, but it wasn't completely fixed.
Well, just to double back to Steve's point about if they were watching the spring game, and I'm not saying that's where Steve's at. I mean, maybe that they did, but we go back to 2014, it was a 17-7 snooze fest when Braxton Miller was injured and JT Barrett, granted the passing was a little further advanced there, 15 of 33 for $151. Cardale Jones was 13 of 29. But, if you're watching a glorified scrimmage where you're splitting a team, taking 15 to 20 players out who are having procedures, little things cleaned up, who are not playing in the game, and you're judging some sort of grand decision based on that. I mean, fake news. Fake news big time, because that's just not the way to do it.
What I like about putting stock in the spring game is if a Buckeye, and this goes back 30 years, if a Buckeye has a great spring game, people will dismiss it. But if he has a bad game, then that is the point of fact. This is who he is. And Justin Fields was 4 of 13. But if he, you go back to, we Buckeye fans know, and people who have covered Ohio State know, it's like Bam Childress. That's the name. Spring game MVP every year would look great and then never do anything during the season. So anytime somebody does something good during the spring game, it gets dismissed. And I would like to maybe recommend that some people do that with Justin Fields, because he wasn't live and he is going to run the ball. And quarterbacks, it's not a situation where quarterbacks are going to look good. Now, back to something you were saying, Mark, about the defense and the running game struggling, all of those struggles last year. That's something that I completely I guess I forget about it, because we're kind of entrenched here and seeing and talking to the coaches who are making these changes, and we assume these changes are going to be made. But you're absolutely right. This team couldn't run the ball, had trouble stopping the ball, looked bad at times, giving up big plays all the time. And here, a few minutes away from campus, we see those things being addressed, assuming they will be addressed. Magazines from wherever, written in Chicago, written in Charlotte, written in Atlanta by people who aren't necessarily on the beat, or maybe are on the beat, but it's I guess it's a 30,000-foot view where those things are still issues until, like you said, they aren't, and we don't know that they aren't until we see them on the field. And for me, sometimes I forget that that's sort of the perception of last year's team, even though I talk about it every week on the podcast and write about it all the time. But you assume these changes are going to be made.
Yeah, and with the coaching acumen of the people that are in place, with Greg Madison coming onto the staff as well, and with the recruiting rankings of the players that are on the field, it would just seem to make sense that they will get fixed. But they were supposed to get fixed week to week last year, and they just never did. Again, they played better the last 3 games against Michigan, Northwestern, and Washington defensively, but still weren't anything close to a dominant defense.
It's hard, and you talk about fixing it from week to week. It's hard to fix your jet engine when you're at 45,000 feet. I mean, at that point, you're kind of a work in progress. And even with the one open week that was on the schedule last year, when you have the same coaching philosophies that are carrying through, and that's not an indictment of Greg Schiano's system or anything along those lines. We can all sit here and question and agree that there were just some odd things with how close the linebackers played the line of scrimmage, some of the pursuit angles, things along those lines. But it's a lot more difficult at that point for the line or for the defense as a whole to fix itself. So, you really want to hope that this year, some new blood, some new ideas, maybe a little bit of a scheme change. If a 4-2-5 becomes a little bit more of a base defense, not as much press quarters, that they will get off to a better start. But I just want to get back to one more thing too, as we sit there and we're ready to anoint Michigan Big Ten East champions, send them to Indianapolis, tell them about the shrimp cocktail at St. Elmo, all the trappings there. Who's going to run the ball for them? Chris Evans is suspended for the year. They have a back who ran a little bit against Florida in their annual bowl game against Florida, their annual bowl loss against Florida. They have a redshirt freshman, and then they have a 3-star but relatively well-regarded running back coming in who will be a true freshman as well. Shea Patterson better be able to do everything, because at this point, I don't see anybody on the team that's going to be able to run the ball with any consistency.
Yeah, I think their offense is probably going to pick up a little bit, other than, as you mentioned, the running game is kind of a question. I think that they could have a dynamic passing attack. But again, one kind of feeds off of the other. As I look at the Phil Steele book right here, they've got 8 returning starters on offense and 5 on defense. So, if they can solve, as you said, the running back position and find a workable running back, maybe that would be kind of the last piece of the puzzle for them. And at times last year, they were pretty good. I mean, they put 42 on Penn State. Had some really big games at times. And so I want to see, again, in the early portion of their season, I want to see how they've solved this, because if they can't run the ball effectively when they want and need to run the ball effectively, they're going to be in a lot of close games.
Yeah, the running game at Michigan is always key, but it's looking to be less key this year than it has been at maybe any other time because of the approach on offense that they're taking. But it's going to be key in November against the better teams down the stretch. Speaking of the running game and what needs to happen up front for a particular team to be effective offensively, of course, is at offensive tackle. And we see here in just the last couple hours that Ben Christman, this offensive tackle out of Revere, the second-rated player in Ohio, number 3 offensive tackle in the nation, has committed to Ohio State. So what do we know about this kid?
I'm going to my notes right now, because
everybody's Googling.
I was letting Kevin just do this.
I'm woefully unprepared.
I can tell you this is kind of an interesting wrinkle. He plays at Revere High School, which is in Richfield, Ohio. I think Pete Nance, who plays basketball, I think at Northwestern, is from there. His dad, played in the NBA and did his wear. It's basically where the Coliseum used to be for the Cleveland Cavaliers on the southeast side of Cleveland. I don't know that they play the top football powers in that region, but it is a pretty good sized school. And interesting thing, I read about this today. The team attended a football camp at Tiffin, and the guys who were scheduled to coach the team were caught with alcohol, believe it or not, at the camp. So they're going to be operating and they fired the entire staff, all 9 guys. They're going to be operating with an entirely new football staff. So it's kind of a weird situation that Ben and his teammates are going through to welcome a new coaching staff, although they have some experience, the guys who are taking over. I thought that was kind of a unique thing and a bit of adversity that he's going to be dealing with. But he's just a junior. So he's one of 4 verbal commitments Ohio State now has for 2021, along with Jack Sawyer, the big-time defensive end from Pickerington North. They just got Jaden Ballard over the weekend, wide receiver from Massillon, Washington, up there in the northeast quadrant of the state. And I believe the other one's the quarterback, McCord. I think he's from Philadelphia area, I believe. So, yeah, so those are the 4 commitments. They're off to a really good start so far, it seems, for 2021. And, you can never have enough good offensive linemen. I think he's in the 6'5", 300-pound range, something like that. So, add another one, another Ohio homegrown offensive lineman and football prospect for the Buckeyes.
Yeah, I finally was able to get to my notes and echo a lot of the things that Steve said. One of the biggest things of note with Ben Christman is just that he just plays with such an attitude. And I know that we throw around the term nasty so much when we talk about an offensive lineman. But, I mean, not only does he play to the echo of the whistle, he may play even a little bit beyond it. And that's really what you want because, it's one thing to be 6'6", 300 pounds or whatnot, but if you get out there and you just don't have the right attitude, you're going to get dominated. And I think that he's going to be somebody that will really be able to step into a role. And when you look at guys like him and then Paris Johnson in the class of 2020, the future of Ohio State's offensive line is very bright. Especially at that tackle position.
And it's a deep Ohio class in 2021 in terms of Ohio State level talent where there's, 6, 8 offers out there already for those guys. And it's kind of very early. And Urban Meyer used to say you got to be careful offering those Ohio guys early because they'll accept those offers. So you got to be sure you want them. And Ryan Day is sure he wants a lot of these guys because he's putting the offers out there. And, that's something that Ryan Day has said. They're going to go after Ohio maybe more than they did before. We'll see how that plays out. It's easy to say that when the talent is at a high level. When there's only 3 guys in the state that you want, then what do you do? How deep do you go? But for now, they look like there's enough guys in Ohio that they're letting running backs go out to Arizona State now.
Right.
So, that seemed to be a bit of an aberration in that the 2021 class, as Tony points out right there, is bucking the trend of Ohio going from an elite state in recruiting to a very good top 10 state, top 7 to 8 to 9 states, something in that range. I guess it's still in that category, in that group, but it's not a top 5 state like it was 10 or 15 years ago.
And a lot of that has to do with just the population shifts. You're seeing a lot of guys, a lot of families that are moving to Arizona, to Texas, down to the, Florida, Georgia, the Carolinas because of job markets and things along those lines. So you're seeing a shift. Ohio, year in and year out, is still going to have its top end guys, whether it's 3 top end guys, 6 top end guys, somewhere in between. And it's really been the middle of the class that's shrunk in a lot of regards. And because of that, Ohio has focused a little bit more out of state. But I'm looking at the rivals rankings for 2021 Ohio. They already have the commitments from 1, 4, and 5 with Sawyer, Christman, and Ballard. Lorenzo Stiles Jr. is a Pickerington kid and a legacy. I expect him to end up at Ohio State. Najee Story, a defensive end out of Solon. I expect him to end at Ohio State. Reed Carrico, an outside linebacker out of Ironton. I expect him at Ohio State. They could clean 1 through 6 very easily in this class of 2021.
I think it's also interesting when we talk about Ohio, Columbus has become what Cleveland used to be. And, there's also a population shift down south in Ohio, basically, where, Pickerington basketball and football they crank out guys all the time. That's Central Ohio. Columbus, you're seeing it. Just the surrounding area of Columbus. Columbus will claim Zach Harrison, but he's a little north, and there's so much talent in Central Ohio right now as compared to what Cleveland used to be. And there's still guys in Cleveland like we see with Ben Christman, but it's mainly Cincinnati and Columbus right now are the 2 hubs in Ohio.
So, Tony, you mentioned that Ryan Day has talked about getting the better players in Ohio, maybe and leaning that way a little bit more than Urban Meyer. And when Urban Meyer was not necessarily open about his recruiting tact and approach much of the time, and for good reason. I can understand it. He felt maybe a bit between a rock and a hard place in regards to the Ohio topic, but he did come out and mention and explain the difficulty there in trying to keep those roots and keep those ties to the Buckeye State, but also you want to win a national championship, and he was all about that. As Ryan Day, of course, he stated that, as you just mentioned. Do we see any other wrinkles in the Ryan Day approach?
You will. He came out a few weeks ago and talked about his approach with awareness to mental health and for adolescents, children, and his players. Having 2 sports psychologists on staff, but that was also something that Urban Meyer was talking about quite a bit last year as a new thing that they were very focused on. So Day said he doesn't want to rock the boat too much, or doesn't want to change things too much right away, but eventually this will look more and more like his own program. And I think you may not notice much of it yet, but then you look at the defensive staff, and that's his defensive staff. That's not Urban Meyer's, and they're going to change what that defense looks like. And you don't want to change too much of the infrastructure, because that's what keeps this thing going smoothly. And when you start doing that, then you're kind of ruining the base and maybe losing a little bit of that smoothness, and things start running a little wonky. And so that's why it's important that they kept the internal guys, the strength staff, and the recruiting guys, because they know what they're doing. You let them do it. Things keep moving forward. And then once you start putting little things in and changing things, you got to make sure you're not slowing the program down.
Any show that includes the term wonky has to be a good one, courtesy Tony Gerdeman on the wonky reference. You don't want a program that's wonky.
Nope.
Wonky equates to Rutgers in my book. That sounds like a Rutgers term to
Wonky
me.
would be an upgrade.
A bit of
Yeah. If they were only wonky.
One day.
Wonky to me is like 5-7, 6-6. We're wonky. Look it up.
Jack Cohn is wonky.
All right. Indiana, wonky.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I
5-7.
think they're a little bit better. A little bit better than wonky. Maybe hinky.
Hinky?
Yeah.
Not good enough.
Nope.
No, it's not been good enough. They keep losing to Purdue with a chance to get to postseason play, and they keep losing to the likes of Ohio State and Michigan when they have a chance to win those games, and Penn State they could have beaten the last few years as well. Will that ever get corrected? Let's talk some Indiana football for a brief minute or two. What is our thoughts about the state of Indiana football? I have, since the end of the Kevin Wilson tenure, now into the Tom O'Brien tenure, again, week after week after week, this team goes out there with pretty marginal talent. The recruiting has been a little bit better. This last class has been pretty good, a class and a half, but it's nowhere close to where it should be to play with those kinds of teams, but typically they do. This has been year after year after year, especially against Michigan. They took them to overtime a couple years ago, double overtime. Took Ohio State. They were throwing the ball in the end zone against that 2014 team, right? Or the 2015 team, the 2014.
They all ran together back then.
Yeah, throwing the ball in the end zone to win the game. And even though the scores have stretched out the last couple of years against the Buckeyes, it's been close with about 10 minutes left. And will Indiana ever get it right? Do they have that opportunity? Do they have the recruiting base? Do they have the resources?
Well, they have a coach, Tom Allen.
I said Tom O'Brien. He used to coach the Anyway,
it was hoped that he would get their defense straightened out. And 4 years ago, they gave up, according to my handy dandy Phil Steele, 37.6 points per game. That's not going to win you any games. They got that down to 25.3 in 2017. So they cut almost 2 full touchdowns off what they were giving up with what Tom Allen was doing scheme-wise. You had Kevin Wilson over on offense, and he's known as our friend Tim May forever would say, he's a guru. So, you had kind of the best of both worlds there, and a thought that maybe they're going to be much improved. But as you said, they just can't get out of their own way, just can't get over the hump. When you think they're going to win a game, they lose it. And I think some people there who care about football, the few people there who do, probably are wondering right now whether Tom Allen is going to be the guy or not. Is he going to be the next Terry Hepner or whoever that's won there, or is he going to be I don't know.
Next week or so.
Yeah, the next Lee Corso or insert the name
Bill
of
Mallory.
Bill Mallory, anybody who's just mediocre 5-6 wins. It is interesting when Ohio State goes over there in week 3. So they're going to get Indiana's best shot in week 3. It'll be a noon game. So it won't be so hyped up over there as it has been for some of the night games there. But Ohio State will get their best shot. Peyton Ramsey, is he going to be the quarterback, or are they going to put in the redshirt Michael Penix? It sounds like it could be him. So I guess we'll have to wait and see on that. But Ramsey's had a ton of experience the last 2 years. They just haven't gone anywhere with him at the quarterback. So
and they've got a fleet of talented running backs. And Kevin, I heard Tom Allen say this offseason that he thinks that they're going to have a top 20 defense.
Yeah, and I'm going to regrow a full head of hair. I mean, we all have hopes and desires. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to realize them at this point. I think that their offense is pretty fun to watch. I'm in the Michael Penix camp. I think he should be the guy. He's dealt with some injuries. Peyton Ramsey has a lot of experience, but that doesn't always necessarily mean that you're the most capable person at that spot. I think Stevie Scott, their running back, who filled in for the departure of Morgan Ellison, I think Stevie Scott is a fun guy to watch. I mean, he's a hoss out there. I mean, he's just an exciting runner. But, when it comes down to the Indiana defense, I think they can do well, but I challenge anybody to name 3 guys on that defense. I mean, and they're, a Big Ten East team. I mean, they're a team that we're all supposed to sit there and watch relatively close. And, I'm struggling to name one right now.
Marcelino Ball.
Yes. All right. There's one.
Marcelino Ball.
So, Kevin, following the spring game, in which I did actually do an Indiana spring report, and I think 37 people watched it, I could have at that point named 3 or maybe 5 or 7 or 10 Indiana defensive players. But, yeah, I'm tapped out right now. Tony, you do your Big Ten position previews. How's Indiana looking?
Well, they do have options at quarterback. But to me, Peyton Ramsey is kind of like he's Indiana in a nutshell. He's good enough to get them in the game, but not good enough to put them over the top. And we see that the Michigan games alone, where he keeps things alive with his legs, but then he also then kills them at the end sometimes with his arm. So, yeah, I'm with Noon. It might be time for a change there. Maybe they go with a 2-quarterback system. Kevin Wilson has done that there before, and we'll see, what they do there. But Tom Allen, I like him. I didn't expect to like him. I remember talking to Terry Hepner way back when, and this was a guy where at the Big Ten Media Days, he had a table full of people listening to what he had to say, and you wouldn't expect that for an Indiana head coach. And I don't know that I'm not saying Tom Allen is that, but if Indiana stays patient, but then what is the end game for Indiana? What is the goal? Can you finish ahead of what is Michigan State the pinnacle? Like, because you've got Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan. You can't expect to finish routinely ahead of either of those 3 programs. So is the goal Michigan State? Is it we have to stay ahead of Maryland as long as we're there? Is it 7 wins? Is 8 wins? Because if you're counting 3 losses, maybe with the 4 other top Big Ten teams in the East, it's hard to do any better than that when you're in the East. And I'm sure they look over at the West and think, what could we do over in the West? If we had a senior quarterback and senior linebackers, and when everything comes together like it does for the teams out there. But we know they've got good running backs. I'm doing the receivers now. They lose their top 2 slot receivers, but they'll replace those. They've got big outside guys that return over 40 catches each. A couple of guys there. So they've got weapons. It's just, will they get the consistent quarterback play? Tom Allen's a defensive guy. I think he gets quite a bit out of his guys. But what is the best that they can do? And is it beating one of Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan? Because you can't, in a given year. You can't expect them to beat two of those teams.
No, I just pulled out my handy dandy Phil Steele, keep referencing it. 11 straight losing seasons for Indiana. Now, they have been to 2 bowl games in those times, but lost them both. Ended up 6-7 both of those years. Have been to 3 bowl games in the last 26 years. So it's not a program that when I speak to Ohio State alums, we get off on this tangent, Alabama, Clemson, it's almost as if the Indianas are playing a different sport. They don't spend the money to the way Ohio State, Alabama, and Clemson. And this is true about Maryland, although, they probably want to. Rutgers, Illinois, any number of these, probably in Iowa State, just as an example, they're not spending the money commensurate with a Texas or an Oklahoma, Ohio State, a Clemson, and Alabama to compete at the highest level. They are just happy to field a team, glad to sell out their stadium when two of these teams come through, and above all else, collect their $40 or $50 million in TV money that's guaranteed because people tune in to watch Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State, and for the Big 12, Texas and Oklahoma. They're not trying. And, say what you will, say what you want, but Indiana's never going to be in the college football playoff. And
secondary sport for them.
It's a secondary sport, and I think that this rings true for about of the Power Five. I think it rings true. Let's say there's 65, 68 teams in the Power Five, whatever the number is. This probably rings true for about 30 of them, that they are never going to be in the playoff. They're if they win their conference, they got a shot at it. They're not automatic, of course. That's a big bone of contention, but like the BCS, and everybody brings up Connecticut got in because they were the Big East designee that one year, and they went out there to the Fiesta Bowl and lost $8 million on tickets or whatever it was, playing in the Fiesta Bowl. Their greatest football triumph was a 30-point loss in the Fiesta Bowl. It's just the haves and have-nots. I mean, we've talked about Indiana. Yeah, it's fun the 7 days of the year when you're getting ready to play them. That game, a couple years ago, the season open over there was a lot of fun. But, at the end of the day, there's a glass ceiling to how high some of these teams and some of these programs can get. It's kind of cool when one of them, butts up against it every now and then and gets to 9 wins, like Minnesota did with Tracy Claeys right before they, chopped his head off, because Minnesota's won 9 games a lot of years. They've won 9 games a lot of years, and that wasn't good enough for them.
So just at the moment that I was going to make a programming announcement that we were launching our Indiana Hoosiers live stream next week, featuring Tony, Steve, and Kevin, Steve reminded me, oh yeah, nobody cares about Indiana football. Nobody's going to watch. All right. So I thought you guys were doing a splendid job on Indiana analysis there. So I figured, hey, let's get back together and maybe we'll knock this Ohio State talk to the curb.
Their football is almost as irrelevant as their basketball. Can you believe that they have had the Big Ten tournament, started in 98. So this was the 21st year they've had it. And Indiana has never won it. Indiana has never won the Big Ten basketball tournament. That is a crazy statistic, I think, when you think about a program that kind of, puts itself out there as the top basketball program in the Big Ten. I mean, they've been lapped by Michigan State and several others, Wisconsin, Ohio State, Michigan, and maybe others.
I may have to apologize for the next 5 minutes that I've turned this into Indiana Hoosiers live here for the last 15 or 20 minutes. But hey, this is where it went. This is where we took it, talking Indiana football in June. We don't do that in November, so we might.
You also had my social statement about haves and have-nots in there that didn't necessarily apply strictly to Indiana. I just use Indiana as my example when I'm speaking to Ohio State alumni that they're never going to play for this. This is special ground right here when you talk about the playoff.
I can't argue with that based on what we've seen for years and years and years and years and years. All right, this is and will continue to be, I promise, Ohio State Buckeyes Live, and we come your way each and every Wednesday night, 9 o'clock Eastern Time, with this panel of gentlemen that do such a fine job at their respective platforms. Kevin Noon from Buckeye Grove on Rivals, Steve Hellwagon from 247 Sports Bucknuts, and from the Ozone.net, Tony Gerdeman. Any parting statements from anyone?
You want to spend 5 good minutes on Minnesota?
Hey, I have told people out there that suggest all sorts of live streams, and this week it's been Michigan, LSU, Clemson, and Florida have been demanded of me doing live streams on them each and every week. That, hey, I'll do live streams on anybody if they get supported, but I know better than that. So we'll stick right now to Miami, Florida State, and Ohio State each and every Wednesday night, and we'll see what expands from there in regards to our programming lineup. All right, guys, we appreciate you stopping by each and every week, and appreciate the loyalty. Kevin's going to be on vacation next week. So, Kevin, you have yourself a heck of a time. Don't worry about us. We will carry on. We'll struggle on through.
I'm sure he will be very worried.
I'll be at the pool bar all day, all night.
The swim up bar.
Yes.
That sounds like so much fun. My vacation consists of going to Denver this year. My wife has a convention there, so we're going to go out there and explore the Rocky Mountains. So that's going to be a lot of fun. I'm going there right after the Big Ten meetings, so it's kind of good timing.
I've actually spent many a summer out there in Colorado at the it's based on relationships out there. And it's a good time. It's a great state, beautiful weather, and sunshiny, as they like to post on signs all over the state, about 310 days out of the year.
Yeah, but 280 of those have snow.
Well, I know the temperatures there now are in the 90s. My college-age children just turned 20, twins, this past week, and they want to know, Dad, are we going to go to a, quote, dispensary? And I said, I don't think we're going to the dispensary. I'm sorry. I mean, you guys are adults, whatever. So
what if they had glaucoma?
Yeah.
What kind of conference is this, Steve?
I don't know. Well, it's all above board. It's legitimate. It's my wife's company and her thing. But that's something we're really looking forward to, because I've never, other than flying into Denver, I've never spent any time there. Looking forward to the scenery and everything.
It is a beautiful place, and I will say that to wrap up what is otherwise gone off the rails. Thanks, gentlemen. We appreciate you stopping by and being the core of what we do here each and every Wednesday night, Ohio State Buckeyes Live. We'll see you guys next week.
Yep.
Except for Kevin, of course. We will see you soon.
See you too.
See it.
Everybody else on the live stream, thanks so much for joining us. If you have any comments or questions that you would like me to answer, certainly get those comments and questions out of the live chat and just leave them to any of the videos, and I will respond as soon as possible. We'll see everyone very soon.